Genshin Impact 5.4 is right around the corner, bringing us the brand new 5-star Mizuki, as well as Sigewinne, Furina and Wriothesley. But when it comes to pulling on those banners, you could waste a lot of Primo Gems if you aren't careful. So, in this video, we're gonna talk about all these 4 characters, what they can do, how good they are, which teams they excel in, and so on and so forth. Plus, we're also gonna take a quick look at the 4 stars as well as the weapon banners, so you can make the best pulling decisions possible for your personal account. And with all that being said, let's jump right into it. Just before we get to the first character, one thing real quick that I always say in those banner reviews: if you personally just really love one of those characters, regardless of whether they're meta or not, then definitely pull for whatever is fun to you. It's your account and you do you. All I'm trying to do here is give you an overview of which characters provide the most value to an account, but please don't take my words as a must-follow instruction. But alright, with all that being said, let's first talk about Mizuki, the new kid on the block and the brand new 5-star character introduced on this banner. Mizuki is an Anemo character, she uses a catalyst, and she is an on-field DPS unit. Her kit is relatively straightforward in that her burst is a little bit of a grouping tool, but also provides food drops that can heal your team if you pick them up, or deal damage if you don't. But the main thing about her is her elemental skill, which puts her in a kind of floaty state where she shoots out clouds that, on impact with an enemy, create a little AoE explosion of Anemo that can also swirl elements. And when it comes to swirling, this is basically her entire thing, where she wants to be in a team with off-field characters of the 4 base elements, so she can hold Viridius and Venerer and swirl all their elements around, and that then is kind of her thing. Now, you might wonder, how strong will she be? And when it comes to that, as with any character that hasn't officially been released yet, we will of course have to wait until the patch is out and actually see the numbers that she is dealing. So by all means, if you are considering maybe pulling for her, then at the least wait till the first creators have their Mizuki reviews out, so you can have an actual impression of how good she is. But all in all, I think it's kind of universally accepted that she's not all that amazing in terms of the numbers that she can deal, and if you're looking for an Anemo on-field DPS unit, then she's probably not the best pick. As for her team options, I think she's going to be very flexible because of the fact that she wants to swirl different elements. There are a lot of sub-DPS units of all the different elements that you can choose to swirl around, so I think pretty much every account can at least get some use out of her. And it seems like that in contrast to other main DPS units, she doesn't really have this one ideal team where everything else is worse, but rather you can mix and match a lot. In terms of her weapon options, it's also pretty flexible. You're just gonna go for whatever has a lot of elemental mastery, because elemental mastery is what you need to deal more swirl damage, and especially with the catalyst, there are quite some options to choose from. Of course, her signature weapon, about which we're gonna talk in a minute here, but you can also use a stat stick, like for example the one from Nahida, or 4-star options that also provide elemental mastery, so I would say all in all she is relatively free-to-play friendly. But, and this is the big but here, if you're considering pulling for her, there is one thing you absolutely have to know. After 5.4 ends, Mizuki is gonna go onto the standard banner, meaning whenever you fail a 50-50, you have a chance to get her, and since we now also get 1 free 5-star selector per year in Genshin, that means when the next 5-star selector comes online, you have the option to just pick her for free, guaranteed. So, in my humble opinion, there is absolutely no reason to go for her right now. Rather save up the primos for someone else, and if you really want to have her, then at the latest point, when the next 5-star selector comes, just pick her and be happy ever after. Up next, let's talk about Sigewinne, Mizuki's first phase banner colleague, so to speak. Now, most people kind of agree that Sigewinne is probably one of the worst, if not even the worst, limited banner 5-star character. And when she was first released last year, I myself also made a video saying pretty much the same thing. However, after some more consideration, I think I gotta cut her some more slack. So let's jump into it. Sigewinne's kit is relatively simple. Her burst is something we don't really need to talk about because it's a DPS burst that doesn't deal a lot of DPS, so that's usually not what you're playing for. The main thing about Sigewinne is her elemental skill, which creates a bubble that will bounce between enemies, and whenever it bounces, it gives you team-wide heal. Now, all in all, out of all the team-wide healers in the game, Sigewinne is definitely the worst one, looking at the pure numbers. However, there is a catch, and this is something that I don't hear all that many people talk about, and that is that her team-wide heal is on her elemental skill. All the other healers need to burst for that. And while I totally understand that if you build a hyper-focused, optimized Spiral Abyss team, you don't really care about that because you're gonna have your energy recharge management anyway, and your team-wide healers are gonna burst every rotation anyway, I think for most players in the game, this highly optimized Spiral Abyss performance isn't all that important, and therefore Sigewinne could be a very nice, comfortable pick to have constant access to team-wide healing. And now that we're already talking about team-wide healing, let's next talk about her teams, which is relatively straightforward. Sigewinne is the #1 premium companion for Furina. If you don't have Furina, then please do not go for Sigewinne because she's not gonna make any sense on your account then. The really only purpose for her is to be combined with Furina because Furina drains your entire team's health, and then Sigewinne can use her team-wide heal to compensate for that and push it back up. Meaning, long story short, Sigewinne is the companion for Furina if you want to have a Furina plus team-wide healer core for whatever team that you like, and in that sense, Sigewinne is not the best option on paper, but definitely the most convenient, enabling your Furina to be used in scenarios where otherwise you might not really want to waste the burst of your team-wide healer. However, before we go on to the next topic, there is one thing that I want to make very, very, very clear. Even though I think Sigewinne is a very comfortable pick to pair with Furina, she is really a premium character for players who don't mind spending money. If you are a free-to-play player, or maybe just a mild spender who does a battle pass here and there, or maybe the Blessing of the Welkin Moon, then I think it is definitely a smart decision not to go for Sigewinne, but rather invest those Primogems into other characters that benefit your account more. And just by the way, if you could maybe spare a like for the video, that would be super lovely because it always helps me big time with the YouTube algorithm, so cheers so much for your support. Okay, so much for the limited banner 5 stars in the first phase, but we now also have confirmed information on which 4 stars will be accompanying them, those being Xiangling, Sayu, and Goru, so let's also take a quick look at those. Now, for Xiangling, I don't think I need to say all that much. She is one of the strongest sub-DPS characters in the entire game, and her pyro damage output is so crazy that she's even somewhat on par with the Pyro Archon herself. So, long story short, I think sooner or later, every Genshin account out there should have a Xiangling, and ideally also at Constellation 4, because that is where she gets even more power. But, and this is the big but here, please do not pull on this banner in the hopes of getting Xiangling from it, because there are so many other ways to obtain her. For example, you can get 1 copy for free just from doing a couple Spiral Abyss floors. Then you have the Lantern Rite each year, where you get 1 Liyue 4-star for free, so that's another free Xiangling. And in addition to that, you can buy her twice a year from the Star Glitter shop, meaning out of all the 4 stars in the game, Xiangling is one of the most accessible ones. Up next, we have Sayu, who isn't all that amazing, but on the other hand, I also think she often gets overlooked. What Sayu does is actually relatively nice. Due to the fact that she's an Anemo character, she can hold the Viridescent Venerer set and therefore shred enemy resistance, plus she provides heal, which is always appreciated, so I would say she isn't all that bad, but on the other hand, she's also not really a character that you want to necessarily pull for. And finally, we have Goru, who is a very strong Geo buffer, however pretty useless outside of Geo teams. However, and this goes for all the 4-star characters on this banner, I think the 5 stars here are so not worth pulling for the overwhelming majority of players that I would recommend, even if you want to have one of those 4-star characters, please do not pull for them on this banner, because in my honest opinion, it would put you at a great risk of wasting your primos on a potential early 5-star that you don't have any use for. And now, before we go on to the second banner phase, let's also quickly talk about the weapon banner, where I'm not gonna sugarcoat it, right? I tried to cut Sigewinne some slack, but when it comes to those weapons, this is literally and hands down the worst weapon banner that we've ever had, I think. First of all, Sigewinne's weapon, the Silver Shower Heartstrings, is probably the worst 5-star weapon in the entirety of Genshin Impact. This thing is so comically bad that it's really only usable on 2 characters, that being Sigewinne of course and Yelan, but even for Yelan it's really not all that amazing. And even if you're one of the few people who actually want to get Sigewinne, then even Sigewinne doesn't really need it and can do more than enough with just a cheap free-to-play option. Looking forward to Mizuki's weapon. This one is actually pretty decent for a swirl DPS. It's of course going to be her best in slot, but due to the fact that it gives elemental mastery, you can also always use it as a stat stick on characters that want that, for example on Nahida, and in case you like to play your Sucrose as an on-field swirl DPS, then this is probably also going to be her new best in slot option for that. However, in the grand scheme of things, I would still say it's probably not worth going for, because A, it's gonna go on the standard banner, and B, following the trajectory of chronicled wishes that we had so far, I think in a few months when we're gonna have the next chronicled wish, this might be Inazuma themed, and therefore is likely to include this one as well if you really want to have it. And for the 4-star weapons, I'm not even gonna waste your time here. They are all pretty darn garbage and definitely not worth pulling for on this banner. So yeah, long story short, the first phase of the 5.4 banners is a pretty safe skip for most players out there. Let's now go on with the second phase, where I want to start out with Furina, which is a whole different story. Furina is probably one of the best 3 characters in the entire game, and that turns the second phase banner already into quite the banger. Now, I talked about Furina multiple times in the past already, so I'm gonna keep her description a little bit shorter here. Furina basically does 2 different things. With her elemental skill, she is a Hydro sub DPS and a pretty good one at that, dealing significant portions of damage and having a 100% uptime. However, the catch here is, whenever she deals damage with her elemental skill, the whole team loses a bit of their maximum HP, so she drains the HP of the entire team over time. However, this is kind of actually what you want, because her elemental burst buffs the entire team's damage based on how the team health fluctuates up and down. So to make it very short, what you want to do with Furina is, you want to pair her with a team-wide healer so that Furina's elemental skill drains the HP of the team-wide healer heals that back up, and this whole up and down health fluctuation will lead to massive damage buffs for the entire team once you activate Furina's burst. So yeah, long story short, she is incredibly strong. The damage buffs that she provides are very noticeable, and she even deals off-field hydro damage with good numbers too. In terms of team flexibility, you can fit her into most teams out there as long as you need Hydro, but she is restricted in one way, and that is that without a team-wide healer, she really starts to struggle a bit. However, I would still say Furina is incredibly strong, and in case you don't have her already, then this is a great option to get her, and I promise you, you're not gonna regret it. And now, last but definitely not least, let's also talk about the arguably most controversial character on this banner, and that would be Wriothesley finally having his first rerun. Wriothesley is an on-field cryo DPS using a catalyst, however the catalyst kinda takes more of a background role because in reality, he just punches the living heck out of all the enemies with his big Thanos-like glove. Wriothesley's kit is very simple. Because of the fact that he is a catalyst character, that means his normal attacks are by default already dealing pure elemental damage, no infusion needed. His skill is as simple as it gets, you simply activate it and that makes your normal attack stronger for some time. However, it does come with a catch, and that is when you're under the buff effect of his skill, you lose health with every hit, and then his elemental burst is one big bada boom, dealing massive damage, which makes his playstyle relatively simple. Go on the field, activate your skill to get the damage buff and hack away at the enemies. Once your burst is full, you can also use that to deal additional damage, and that is basically it. However, there is one more thing. While you are in your normal attack combo, at some point you will notice that Wriothesley starts glowing in a sort of reddish light. And when that happens, you need to activate a charged attack which will deal massive damage and regenerate some of the previously lost health. Now, all in all, I really love the design of Wriothesley as well as his kit, and I'm probably gonna go for him personally, but when it comes to the overall account value and his power, Wriothesley unfortunately does have some issues. The first one being that cryo in and of itself isn't really the best element for a DPS at the moment. I hope this is going to change in the future with the release of Snezhnaya, but as it stands right now, this already puts him a little bit out of the spotlight. However, more importantly, and this is something that really bugs me, is that Wriothesley, in contrast to most other DPS characters, doesn't really feel whole at Constellation 0. Instead, if you want to play him conveniently and to his full potential, I think he, more than most other DPSs in the game, really wants his C1, and this leaves a sour aftertaste because it feels like Hoyo deliberately created him with a flaw in his kit just to then sell you the solution, and I really don't like this. However, if you really enjoy Wriothesley, you would like to have him and you don't really care about the additional price, then he's definitely a viable character, dealing big numbers and perfectly viable for all the content in the game. And before we go on now to the weapon banner phase 2, there's another thing that I want to mention with Wriothesley, and this is also with regards to weapons, where just like with the Constellation one, also Wriothesley really likes to have his signature weapon. He is going to get more of a damage boost out of having his signature weapons than many other DPSs out there. However, just in case you have it, Wanderer's signature weapon, you know, this blue bell thingy, I forgot the name, this is also pretty good on him, but outside of those two, the other options kind of fall off in terms of damage relatively quickly. And now, last but not least, let's also take a quick look at the second phase weapon banner, where we both have the signature weapons for Wriothesley and Furina. As I just said, Wriothesley's Catalyst is really good for him, and if you want to build a strong Wriothesley team, then I think this weapon banner is actually pretty darn good, because you want to get him his signature weapon, and this time it happens to be on the banner with Furina's signature, which is also overall a very good sword, so even if you accidentally get Furina's weapon instead of his, it's not all that much of a loss. However, on the other hand, if you got Furina, then sure, her signature weapon is also going to be nice for her, but it's not as much of a necessity as for Wriothesley, for example, and I'm not really sure if it's worth it to pull for her sword on this banner, because if you accidentally get Wriothesley's Catalyst and you don't really have any use for it, then this is not going to help your account a lot. So, long story short, for Wriothesley enjoyers, this weapon banner is probably going to be a decent chance to get his signature. However, for Furina enjoyers who don't want to have Wriothesley or Wanderer, you might rather not take the risk. And in case you still need enhancement ores for your upcoming weapons, then definitely don't miss this Natlan mining guide right here. We see each other, hopefully in the next one, and until then, as always, travel smart.